Okay, in today's video, I'm going to talk you guys through how I acquired my first high-ticket online client whilst working as an in-person personal trainer in central London. So for context, what I'm referring to as high ticket is at the time I was charging $1,000 per month for my service. You guys can see the first payment being sent across to me here of $500 from a new client of mine. That was sent across on the 25th of May, 2018. So a long, long time ago. And I would have just turned 20 here. And this was the start of my business really scaling. Prior to that point, I was doing everything in an in-person capacity. I was making between 4 to 6 grand per month, GBP, working from 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. every single night, 5 days per week, and oftentimes Saturday as well. And I really wanted to build a scale online. I was desperate to do so at the time. I saw no longevity in working in person for longer than a couple of years. Which resulted in a year prior, me starting my online service, as you guys can see here. Now, this was an online service that I was offering essentially to friends of mine or individuals who had engaged with the limited following I built thus far on my Instagram, which at the time was called Be Fit Physique, which is absolutely mental. You guys can see that from the document here as well, attached from 2017. If you try to reach out to this number, by the way, it's my old number. You won't get access to me. But yeah, this was mental. I was charging £100 per month for my services at the time, primarily for individuals who were students or people wanting to build their physique. And you guys can see from my photos, actually, what kind of client I was working with at the time. So a lot of them were individuals who wanted to build some kind of physique, and that was their primary outcome they wanted to achieve by working with me. So a lot of the images I was posting at the time, the content I was posting was predicated around physique and the transformation that I had made. You guys can see examples of that here. Again, this being in 2017. So a lifetime ago, it feels like a lifetime ago to me. And I started working with individuals like Connor, who's a good friend of mine, to build his physique as well. Replicate transformation I achieved. This individual here I helped get on stage for some weird work do, a topless work do, which was slightly bizarre. Anyway, a lot of the content I was posting was predicated around physique transformation. And therefore, yeah, I was working with a lot of young individuals who wanted to achieve their physique. And I was posting content in my free time around my client work. So you guys can see here, this is in between my one-to-one clients at Gymbox. And I was getting some engagement online as well, which is great from the content I was posting, even though it's very limited in value. Yeah, extremely limited in value, quite frankly. But nonetheless, I was building something, or I was trying to do so. And it was a start, at least, which is, of course, led me to the position I'm in right now, which I'm very thankful for, which is great. So anyway, let's dive back into this. So yeah, as you guys can see, I was charging £100 per month. This is an individual called Joe Smirk. In terms of deliverables for that, it was one-to-one calls twice per week, oftentimes once per week, just depending on their availability. And I had built a pretty significant roster by this point. I was working with between 20 to 30 clients online. So I was making a few extra grand on the side of my one-to-one work, which is great, but I was working like a workhorse. It was mental. The amount of hours I was putting into my business at the time was just ridiculous. I thought that I could leverage lead magnet assets like if it fits your macros, documents like this. You can see the crap branding that I put together for myself as well. Training splits, which I was sending through in Google Docs, which is horrendous, but again, it was a start, and guides to training. So yeah, I started from here. And a year later, I realized very quickly that I need to start charging high ticket for my services to justify my time and actually scale and build my business. In order to do so, I had to define what my offer was. I'd invested in a mentorship program from a guy called Sterling Griffin at the time. It was a 10K investment, I believe, between 8 to 10K. All the money that I had at the time as a 19, 20-year-old. And unfortunately, the investment and the product was crap. But nonetheless, it taught me at least the foundations of building an offer, the premise of building an offer. And I realized very quickly that all the clients that I wanted to work with were individuals who had built their own businesses and were entrepreneurial. Not only because they could afford a high-ticket service, but because I just enjoyed spending time with them. And a lot of the clients I was working with at Gymbox in an in-person capacity who were on retainers with me were individuals who ran their own real estate businesses, recruitment businesses, software businesses, etc. To the extent where now I'm still working with clients that I worked with in Gymbox, but I now charge a much more extreme price for my service. One of my clients, Kane Fallon specifically, I was working with back in 2017. He runs a big recruitment business, his own business. I was working with him in person in 2017, and I worked with him again this year, which is really, really cool. But of course, the price I charge for that service now is 15K. It's much more extensive than what it was at the time. Anyway, besides the point. So I at least had an indication of an offer hypothesis and the kind of clientele I could work with. Now, in order to facilitate growth online, I thought it'd be extremely important for me to further clarify what my offer was, as opposed to just working with individuals who are entrepreneurial and business people and help them build some kind of physique. I thought, okay, I really need to dial this in now, because that's very limited in terms of the amount of information I presented, or rather the offer and the value in the offer. So I started coming across articles like this from individuals called Serge Fagé. Now, this article was actually published after I'd acquired my first client, and the first client I did acquire for the £1,000 a month retainer, I had sold on the $1 million body premise, and I'll show that to you guys in a second as well, because it's an awful offer. But anyway, it's still converted. So I started coming across content like this. I'm 32, spent $200,000 on biohacking, became calmer, thinner, extroverted, healthier, and happier. Serge really was the kind of Brian Johnson of 2017. And fundamentally, his premise really was to maximize his biochemistry and physiology to ensure he has better energy, mood, focus, happiness, confidence, willpower, intelligence, health, and longevity. And he talks about the process he's been through to facilitate this. And again, his philosophical perspective on this, or at least logical framework for it, in terms of the fact that as humans, we are complex robots. Robots can be tuned and improved. We can have more of whatever we want if we leverage our physiology effectively. And if not, we'll, of course, be screwing ourselves somewhat, right? And then he gave a framework for how to facilitate these outcomes, which became the pillars of my service and still are the pillars of my service today. Sleep, hygiene, nutrition, exercise, mental health, medical testing, supplementation, and drugs. I've slightly amended these. And I'll create some content around my offer premise and sales process in future videos. But nonetheless, these were kind of the precedent for everything that I did as well, which is great. So yeah, I studied content like this obsessively to build my offer premise. And that resulted in me working with Iman Gadzi as well, which I'll show you guys in a second. But anyway, let's dive back into the first client I acquired for $1,000 per month. And again, you guys can see the first invoice being paid here. He paid twice every month. That was $500 being paid here. So this guy was called Omar Musalim. I came across him by identifying the fact that lots of individuals who follow Grant Cardone and who Grant Cardone followed were entrepreneurs who had access to capital and needed help with their health. So I literally went through Grant Cardone's following and follower list, and I was reaching out to about 300 people per day, not only from Grant Cardone's audience, but also from the audience of other individuals in similar financial situations to Grant, or at least audience situations to Grant, who had amassed an audience from the content they published and their career success. So I'd quite literally, in between my PT clients, manually go through his following list and DM people. And as I said, about 300 per day. At the time, I had about 5,000 followers on Instagram. My content was pretty crap, being perfectly frank. And you guys can see from the content I was referring to previously, it was pretty diabolical. You can see here I'm posting stories about like the importance of rest days. So when Instagram stories first became a thing, I'm posting little edits like this in my workouts. It was really pretty diabolical content, but at least it was a start, right? That's the most important thing to acknowledge. Anyway, so I posted that content. I then reached out to individuals like Omar from Grant's following list, and you guys can see my outreach messages were horrendous. First one read as, "Hey Omar, how are you doing today? I super love the content you're producing and the message you're presenting to the world. I hope it's not too weird to say what's up." Bizarrely, that was my outreach message, my first message that I send almost every prospect. And funnily enough, didn't get a huge amount of responses, but at least I did convert clients to start off with. He obviously replies, "Thanks, bro. Hey, bro, thanks for the follow. Always good to connect with other positive people." I then obviously engage a conversation with him and then continue to follow up with him. You guys can see that he didn't respond for a period of about 2 weeks here. And then he asked me to tell him about my fitness program, which of course I do. I referred to it at the time as being the $1 million body program, which is obviously now Peak Health Systems. Peak Health Systems being like the 25th iteration of the offer premise. I refer to it as being a 6-step process. So again, you guys can see how I took inspiration from content from the likes of Serge, etc. at the time. We continue with conversation here. And he's very difficult to pin down to get him actually onto a call. And at the time, I didn't have any systems established. So no Calendly, no Acuity, which was the call booking software at the time that most individuals used, but I use Calendly now. And therefore, we're doing it manually and trying to adjust based on time zones, etc. So we go back and forth for a period of about a week just to get a time established and have his number, of course, right? Which is ridiculous. Anyway, nonetheless, it does result in a sales call taking place after a lot of follow-up on my end. And also arguably from his perspective as well, I did follow up pretty frequently. He's very keen to move forward. And as a result of that, it leads to a conversion taking place on the 25th. So you guys can see the final message being shared here. "Yeah, man, that works. I just need to know how your program works on a day-to-day basis and what the kind of interaction you provide. I don't want a 30, 60-minute call. Ready? And then, of course, we then actually start working together. And you guys can see that that was the 25th. And then the payment was processed the same day, 25th of May, 2018. And that was £1,000 a month retainer being established there. But he wasn't in an abundant financial position, hence why we moved forward with split payments. But this was the start. This was proof of concept to me. And I remember taking the sales call in the spare room that I was living in a family friend's house. It was their daughter's bedroom, and I was staying in it while she's at university. Pink walls. I had to turn my webcam on for the call. I was quite literally shaking. It was in a very girly bedroom. I was shaking, quite frankly, shitting myself about inferring that I'm going to charge £1,000 per month for my service, which was, again, facilitated over a period of 12 weeks and therefore resulted in 3K being banked there for this particular offer and this particular prospect. But yeah, it converted. And as a byproduct of this, I gained tremendous amounts of confidence. And although I was doing pretty well financially from working in in-person capacity, doing about 4 to 6K per month at the age of 19, around that time period, I wanted a lot more. And I really pushed aggressively with my online stuff. I started spending 3 to 4 hours per day doing outreach, producing as much content as I possibly could, trying to build momentum. And that subsequently resulted in me then working with Iman Gadzi. You guys can see the first payment being processed here, or one of the first payments at least. I believe we started working together actually a lot earlier that summer. It would have been about August time. But anyway, you guys can see it here. I was charging £1,000 per month for my services there with Iman. Obviously, he put it through as a business expense and referred to it as social media management. And you guys can see his old company being registered here as well. So yeah, that resulted in my offer being developed and further substantiated to the extent where I started working with the likes of Iman Gadzi. And that then resulted in my business taking off very, very quickly due to, of course, audience exposure, which he very kindly provided me with. And therefore, of course, access to networks of individuals who were high net worth and therefore could afford my services and were in need of my services. And that was the start of my business in every capacity. So yeah, if you guys have got any questions about this at all, of course, don't hesitate to let me know in the comments section. By no means should you have leveraged in any capacity the framework I leveraged for outreach. The point I was trying to make here really was I didn't have an outreach framework or approach. I was just ensuring that people were aware of my existence, and it did result in conversion because I didn't know what I was doing. And this was back in 2018 before there was so much education in the space and access to resources. Not many people really knew what they were doing, particularly not at my age. I was 19, 20. So yeah, this is how I started. Essentially, I was throwing shit at a wall until it stuck. It did stick, and then I grew pretty quickly, which is great. I leveraged it and I pushed pretty aggressively and worked incessantly. I had no social life, nothing for a long period of time. I was just working to build online and then provide for myself in the future and build the life that I live now, which is great. So yeah, if you guys have got any questions about this, drop it in the comment section down below. If, of course, you are interested in working with me in a one-to-one capacity to help me build your fitness and health coaching business online, you have the opportunity to do so by clicking the link in the description of this video, which will take you through to Peak Business Systems, in which I help clients like yourselves grow online, and I've done so very successfully. You guys can see from the about page, the social proof, the client results, etc. And again, I charge the least amount I possibly can do for that service to justify my time being allocated whilst ensuring it's financially accessible to as many people as possible, given that I was extremely resentful of the fact that I had to invest about 10K into my first investment and it was a crap product. So my objective there is to provide as valuable an insight or a service as possible for the least amount possible as well. And therefore ensure that anyone starting can actually successfully invest, learn, and therefore start and grow, as opposed to having to fork out thousands. But yeah, if you guys got any questions at all about the framework I've discussed today, drop me a question in the comment section down below or via Instagram. And we can dive into it there, have a discussion, go back and forth. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.